Welcome to the Fly podcast about personal, corporate, and national resilience. I'm Richard de Crespigny, and today I'm joined by Captain Peter Hörnfeldt, better known to millions around the world as MentourPilot. Peter is a professional airline captain, flight instructor, and communicator who has dedicated his career to making aviation knowledge accessible to the public. His MentourPilot channel has over 2.2 million subscribers, and his ability to explain and translate complex aviation jargon to non-pilots has made him one of the most trusted voices in aviation today. But behind the videos and training lies a deeper story about resilience. Resilience in the aircraft design, cockpits, in the classroom, in regulation, and in the way aviation adapts to change and crises. In this conversation, we'll explore Peter's own journey in aviation, the challenges he's faced, what resilience truly means to him as a pilot, and what lessons the world outside aviation can take from the cockpit. Peter, welcome to Fly.
Thank you so much, Richard. I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, it's my privilege. Now, the first thing I do to all the guest speakers is to ask them to tell me their definition of resilience.
The definition of resilience to me is the ability to deal with things that you have not been trained for or prepared for in a way that is successful, obviously. So you'll be facing situations where you think to yourself, no one has ever prepared me for this, but I still have the tools to deal with it. And that's resilience.
Right. And I suppose at the forefront of that is preparation, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Standard procedures, risk.
That's it. Short-term decision-making is all down to skills, experience, and knowledge. So without those ingredients, there can never be any real resilience either.
Now, you have organised the MentourPilot podcast with over 2.2 million subscribers. Can you tell us more about who you are and your background?
So I am a very regular Swedish guy. I'm 44 years old now. I was about 34 years old when I started the podcast. But I am one of those who have, since I was a teenager, since I was 12, 13 years old, always wanted to become a commercial pilot specifically. And I started my journey back in Sweden, where there is fortunately a government-sponsored commercial pilot program. And once I understood that there was a possibility for me to get in there, I was working very, very hard to manage to get into that program. There's only about 30 spots per year in the country. So my journey towards becoming an airline pilot started very, very early. And fortunately, after a lot of sweat and tears, I got the chance to get into this school. So I started flying when I was 17 and got my first license, my PPL, before I even had my driver's license when I was 18. And then I completed that training. I did my military training, and then I managed to land my first airliner job in the Boeing 737 when I was 20 years old.
And how many flight hours have you got now, Peter?
Today I've got around 11,000 plus or minus.
And you've been instructing pilots for many years as well.
Yeah, I started instructing 4 or 5 years into my career as a training first officer, a synthetic flight instructor, an SFI. And that was probably one of the best decisions that I've ever taken. Going down the instructor route has been extremely beneficial for me personally. I never appreciated the amount of work it takes to become an instructor in the first place. Because you think, when I started, like I said, I was a first officer then, and I was a senior first officer at the time. So I'd been flying for 4 years already. So I was almost up to the level which was needed in my company to start to be looked at for command. And I thought, well, I kind of know the procedures quite well. I'm pretty happy with the technical knowledge as well. And then I was put into the instructor training, and I realized that no, I do not know what I need to know in order to instruct other people. I can answer the questions, but not to the depth needed to make other people understand how the procedures work, for example. So I needed to up my game enormously when I started instructing.
And that's why you're such a good translator. Now, you started your career with 737s. In fact, that's you've flown 737s your entire career. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I've been on the same.
And they first started flying before Neil Armstrong landed on the moon in about they started about 1967. It's quite a remarkable career. Tell the listeners more about the 737, what you love, what maybe you don't love.
So the 737 is a fantastic workhorse. It does what it says on the tin, right? It is, like you pointed out, it's 60s technology. Now the NG that I've been flying most of my career, as well as the 737 MAX, of course, they've got some newer technology in it in terms of avionics and specifically the screens that we work with. But it's the same thing, right? It's like an old Volvo. Right? It works. It's not that complicated. When something breaks, it's pretty easy to figure out what it is that is broken. The systems are interconnected in a way that makes intuitive sense. But the variants that I've been flying, the 800 and the MAX, especially the 800, is a stretched version of what the 737 was supposed to be, which means that it doesn't handle quite as well as the 737-200, for example, did. It's a little bit mushy in the controls, and it takes a while to get used to it. It's one of the hardest aircraft out there to land properly, which is probably why there's so many perceived hard landings with 737s.
But when you said spam, or you said tin, and I'm thinking of spam, which is actually not a bad analogy, because how many 737s have been manufactured? It's well over 14,000, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. So up until a couple of weeks ago, actually, the 737 was the most produced commercial aircraft in the world, but it's just been overtaken by the Airbus A320 model now.
Wow. And the aircraft has a remarkable safety record, but there were two crashes, one in 2018 and another in 2090. Can you tell us about that?
It was the 737 MAX crashes, which everyone kind of knows them as now. Obviously, it was a big wake-up call, I think, for the entire industry, but definitely for Boeing as well. So I've made several videos about those accidents. We are going into detail about all of the different ingredients. As always, there was several parts included, pilot error, including misunderstandings, but mainly you obviously had the implementation of the MCAS system that hadn't been properly communicated to the pilot community, and people just didn't really understand the way that it would work, while Boeing thought that the pilots would understand how it worked and that they would kind of revert back to runaway stabilizer when MCAS activated and if it malfunctioned, which they didn't, and that kind of is the core of the problem.
What does MCAS stand for?
MCAS stands for the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System.
Is it an attempt to put a better fly-by-wire into a non-fly-by-wire aircraft?
So it's more of an attempt to make sure that the aircraft stayed within the certification requirements when it came to certain characteristics of it. So it basically the fact that they put bigger engines on it, those engines actually had an effect on the aerodynamics of the aircraft. They produced a little bit of lift because they were bigger, and that made the aircraft pitch up a little bit too much during certain maneuvers. So if you put the aircraft in a high, steep climb angle, for example, at low speeds, because the engines were now giving a little bit of lift, they actually helped to pitch the nose up further. And that was not great from a certification point of view. So this system was implemented in order to kind of counteract that artificially by moving the stabilizer to counteract that effect. And that is, in essence, what it was. It was never supposed to be a big thing. It was supposed to be a very redundant background system that shouldn't really actually ever be activated in normal use.
Now, you've been very good at telling the public that when there's an accident, people always like to find a scapegoat. And you've always said, look, there are many contributing factors. We have to analyse them all. And so just as one example, who are the contributing people or organisations that are all wrapped up in those two 737 MAX crashes? Because it's not just the pilots, is it?
No. This is a big chain going back many, many years to the start of the 737 MAX program, where the MAX essentially is a reaction to the Airbus A320neo program. I think in the beginning, Boeing was well on their way to actually create a new platform because, as you say, the 737 is a 60s platform. It's been there it's very, very near what it can do in its service life. So Boeing was on its way to create something completely new. But then the Neo came in, and Boeing basically saw that.
And the Neo was from Airbus, right? It was the competitor.
Yeah, it's a re-engined model of the Airbus A320. But the Airbus A320 is a much newer platform in itself. So it was easier for them to re-engine it, to make it more modern. The 737 is an older platform. So, for example, it has lower landing gear, right? The Airbus, you could just slap on these bigger engines, more efficient engines on it, and it was no problem. But in the case of the 737, if you put bigger engines on top of it, then it could scrape the ground. So that's one of the reasons why the engines had to be put a little bit further and a little bit higher up than on the older model. And that is what caused this characteristic that then MCAS had to be implemented in order to solve. So you can see the chain of where MCAS and stuff came from going back 6-7 years before the actual crashes happened. And then there was assumptions made on how pilots would react to a malfunction in this system. There was assumptions made on how dangerous the system was. It was not deemed to be that critical, so it was allowed to be activated by a single sensor, where normally you would have 2 or maybe 3 sensors that would be activated in a very, very critical system. This was not deemed to be that critical by the FAA, so it was allowed to be made this way. And then the actual...
So just to get it, the FAA is a contributing factor in these MAX crashes as well.
Well, to a certain extent. I mean, the certification process allowed the MCAS system to be initially made and be allowed to only use one sensor. So yes, of course, that like the chain goes through many, many, many layers. There's not one single person that took a decision that said this is what caused it. But if you look through, I've done a whole series on Boeing as well. There's commercial pressures involved. There is certification issues. There is the FAA's reliance on Boeing on certain certification issues as well that is in there. So you can see this kind of thing moving slowly up. And then obviously leading out to the 2 MAX crashes, out of which one was not greatly handled by the involved crew. And the second one was better handled, but still it didn't save them. The system was too powerful in the end.
But again, in an attempt to say there are so many players, we could also introduce the airline, and in the first crash, maybe the engineers with the checking. I mean, just about everyone in that big long chain of aviation had an input into those MCAS accidents. But we learn, adjust, and it doesn't happen again, correct?
Absolutely. And that's what's so fascinating and cruel with these accidents, that and this is also why I love aviation, I have to say, because in many industries, you would come to a crash like that for the first MAX crash, and you would very quickly find out that there are some scapegoats here. There are some people here that made obvious mistakes. You're talking about the engineers that put a faulty angle of attack vane in several times. It wasn't correctly checked. This is what caused the MCAS to activate, and so on. So very quickly, if you just skim the surface, you could say, all right, this is what happened and this is what's to blame. But aviation doesn't work that way. They go deeper and look at but why did this system react that way? Who made that system? So we always kind of continue to dig until we get to the root cause of the problem. And then we attack the root cause in order to make sure that aviation is as safe as it is. And this is why the 737 MAX is safe now. Like it's a great aircraft to fly. I've flown it myself. It handles better than the 800 does because it has a little bit of fly-by-wire in it. So it's kind of making itself feel like the original 737-200 was supposed to feel. That is a nice aircraft.
Now, you've reported on so many incidents that happen around the world really since the middle of the last century. Where do you see resilience most tested Can you say you can see it more in say, the cruise or the aircraft design? Where do you see it most tested each day?
So we're seeing the resilience tested in a new way now than if you go back to the middle of last century. The technology just was not as strong, right? So the aircraft was breaking down much more often. You'd have failures more often, and the pilots were basically, well, they needed to be able to fly the aircraft properly and deal with day-to-day problems. That could be engine failures. Like if you go back, you probably remember this as well. Back, if you just go back to before 2000, there would be more issues, technical issues. Now the systems have become so well engineered that technical problems in themselves are much more rare. And the pilots have gotten so much more automation to work with that we become more of operators of the aircraft than actually pilots handling the aircraft. And of course, if technical issues becomes rare, it doesn't mean that they disappear. It just means that they will happen less often. And we will then be potentially a little bit less prepared for example, to fly the aircraft completely manually without any automation available. So what I see now is more of a test of the pilots, actually, and our need to make sure that we keep our stick and rudder skills sharp and that we can continue to fly an aircraft in a way that is not as automated as we are used to flying as.
Some people say, Petter, that it's getting easier to fly aircraft. And I stood up at a conference, about 1,000 people, said, no, it's getting harder. The automation's making it harder. Because, yes, we still have to fly the airplane, whether it's stalled, inverted, spinning or on fire. And we're used to that over the decades. But now the aircraft are automated. So I think it's getting harder. I think the resilience is being challenged more with automation than less. What do you think?
No, I agree. I would agree to that. I mean, this goes back to what I said about the 737, right? The 737 is 60s technology. So if something breaks on the 737, you can see that, okay, now we've got a low hydraulic level in one of our tanks. This is going to lead to the hydraulic pump overheating. You can foresee what is going to happen because it's a logical step. But I mean, you flew the Airbus A380, and Airbus has become a computer, right? Where systems are not necessarily, it's not logical to see why.
No, that's not true. It's 1,000 computers.
Yeah, that's the thing. And it's like, while you would pull a circuit breaker on the Boeing, and that would have a very clear kind of, something very, very clear would happen to the aircraft. That's not longer true when you're dealing with a computer that takes in thousands of different inputs and maybe are also handling completely different systems that are not connected to each other. So that becomes much, much more complicated to do.
And in the case of the incident that I had, QF-32, probably half the pilots in the world thought we should have just thrown it on the ground straight away. But you can't do that with an electric networked aeroplane where what you get at the end of the flight is determined by logic that was maybe written by a university graduate who's never been on an aeroplane. So, I mean, you can trust, but you have to verify.
Of course. And you guys, what you did in Qantas 32 is probably one of the best examples of resilience that is out there. I actually use it when I lecture about these things as an example of where you have, short-term decision-making intersecting with long-term decision-making. And on an Airbus, you're then dealing with hundreds of potential sub-checklists that needs to go through. And you guys, you were supposed to land that thing over 50 tons overweight. So there's no way that you would have been able to just throw it down on the ground without significant risk.
No. Petter, what motivated you to step just to the side a little bit to start MentourPilot?
I have always loved instructing. Instruction, once I've started with it, and once I saw people's reaction to good versus bad instruction, and I could see that little light going off in a student pilot's eye when they understood that actually their hard landing was because of their seat height or something that you could give them, and you saw that they could use that tool to become better. That is something that I absolutely loved. And on top of that, I've always been a bit of a interested in starting up companies, a little bit of an entrepreneur. And I saw in the middle of the last decade that social media was becoming a bigger and bigger thing, but I did not understand it. I had no real knowledge of it, and the only way for me to get knowledge is to get myself into it, to actually work with it. On top of that, my wife said that I needed a hobby. So, and she said, well, you like the sound of your own voice, so why don't you start a YouTube channel? So it was actually her suggestion to do so. And I went out and I researched, and I realized that there was very little positive, constructive aviation content out there at the time. There was a lot of...
There was plenty of negative.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to get to. You went out on sites like, these rumor networks, for example, and you'd find pilots out there who were really complaining about their career and their airline or whatever. And what I realized was that, but why is this? I mean, I love my job. I love my occupation. Why are there so many people complaining about it? And the kind of thing I understood was that happy pilots did not go on the internet. They were out kite surfing or spending time with their family. There was only angry, frustrated pilots who went to the internet to vent. So I thought, I'm just going to change that. I'm going to start talking about my own experiences. I'm not going to represent anyone else than myself, but I'm going to tell people about what I think and how I do things. And since I was a type rating instructor and examiner, it meant that people started to listen. When I was explaining things, they were listening to me, even though I didn't have any flashy graphics or anything at the time. It was just me in front of a computer talking about what I loved in a constructive way, the way I would with my students. And that's where it came
Well,
from.
you can see that skill to translate and teach in your podcasts. Did you expect Mentor Pilot to grow into being the world's most premier, biggest podcast on aviation?
No, never. I knew when I started that it was very niche. That it was never going to be big because it's always going to be a very small subset of YouTube viewers who were interested in becoming a pilot. And when I started, it was for people who wanted to become a pilot. I wanted to give them a view into what it actually was like to work as a, in my case, short, medium haul 737 pilot in Europe. So I had never any intention of that. And I think that is actually a prerequisite for starting a successful YouTube channel, even today, is that you need to go into it thinking that you're going to give something to your audience. You're not going to take. If your view is that I'm going to start something because I want to become famous or I want to earn money or whatever, it's not going to work because the audience are there because they want to get something for free, essentially. And you need to be willing to give that. And that's the only way to grow.
Now, did building the podcast change your perceptions of safety and resilience?
It's given me a lot more insight into the type of mistakes that can be made. It's given me a lot more appreciation for how people deal with these kind of horrible situations, because I don't only cover accidents where people actually die. I cover incidents. I actually prefer covering incidents where something happens and the crew deals with it in a way that keeps everyone safe. So yeah, it has changed me. A very, very clear example of that is that, sometimes when you are up flying and you start to get into a situation where it's you can feel that the odds are starting to stack up against you. Like things are now starting to heat up a bit. That it can be bad weather followed by a tight vector in towards an approach. You're a little bit hot, a little bit high, and you feel like that little thing of I should probably do something here. Now, in those situations, you normally start to hear a voice in your head. And a few years into me doing this, I started hearing my own voice in the back of my head, basically narrating that. Now Captain Petter made a fatal decision. And it basically got me to start asking for vectors at an earlier stage. I was like, no. Let's just go into holding, just to cool things down. We don't need to get there 2 minutes earlier. We just slow things down a bit. So that had a very clear implication on how I flew the aircraft.
I have this perception of, is this a good day, a normal day, or is this a really bad day? And if I decide this is a really bad day, I'll often turn around and go back. I mean, it's a very subjective sort of term. And then the other one I like is, if you think that what's going on now is going to be the first sentence in an accident report, then do something about it and stop it.
Exactly, and that's where that's where my kind of narration voice came in, because I'm doing so many accidents and incidents videos that I could hear myself narrating what was happening, and I didn't like that at all.
Now, I'm going to take you into the area of human factors and CRM. And I think aviation, mining, exploration do this really well. But I want to hear your perception of what human factors is, CRM, and why this is so important in this industry where failure is not an option.
So this goes back to what we were discussing before about resilience and about the threats that pilots are facing right now. With the hardware becoming better and better all the time, it becomes more and more about the software, about us, not only how we interact with each other, but also as pilots, but also how we interact with the machine. So crew resource management, resilience, communication, all of these things, you can see that in the accident reports that are coming from the later years. That's where things start. There's often a misunderstanding or a miscommunication or an issue with the power gradient inside of the cockpit. So there's no question that this is something that we need to continue to work on continuously all the time. And we need to make sure that everyone understands it, even the old guard that maybe didn't think it was so important and they're still around, that actually, no, this is something that is crucial.
When you think about human factors, what do you think are the biggest threats today? Would it be fatigue, mental health, automation?
Well, I have a soft spot for highlighting mental health, right? I don't think that is something that is necessarily a huge thing, but I think it's something that needs to be highlighted, because pilots are just like any other human being. We face high points and low points in our lives, and I think it's extremely important that mental health does not get attached to a stigma, which it is today and has been before. Pilots needs to be able to say stop if they feel that they're not fit to fly, be it because they have broken a leg or because their wife has left them and they're feeling depressed. This should not be something that would threaten your livelihood. And because if it does, the reason I highlight this all the time is because if it does, the only thing that happens is it's going to be pushed on the ground. The issue is still going to be there and it's not going to be dealt with, and it could cause something even worse. So mental health is one of them.
And just on that, you never, in any person in the world, you never know when they come to work or come to your house what's going on inside their head.
No, in fact, that the people that feels the worst are normally the ones that looks like they're the happiest, because they are used to putting a shield up to make sure that people don't realize just how bad they feel. So I've seen it personally with colleagues that have been very, very ill, have not felt very good at all, and no one knew that was the case. And this is, of course, not just only for pilots. This is everywhere. Mental health issues are prevalent. And we need to be on the look for it, and we need to make sure that there are systems enforced so that people can search for help without feeling that they're endangering their livelihood. There's no question that fatigue as well is going to start working its way into becoming a bigger problem, because there's just more and more air traffic around. The rosters are becoming tighter and tighter day by day.
Are the airlines treating limits in how many hours pilots fly as targets?
It depends on the airline, but there are definitely airlines around who does. That would argue that, well, this is the limit, so we can go up to this limit, and we should go up to this limit. There's no question that happens, but I think that it's just the overall picture with more and more traffic density. This is also why we're probably seeing a little bit of an uptick in serious incidents happening. There's been an increase of about 25% of near misses over the last decade compared to the last. Over this decade compared to the last.
And what's a near miss, Peter?
So near miss would be if, for example, what happened in Nice just a few days ago, actually, where an accident is very nearly avoided by some part of our many, many safety barriers that we build into aviation. And it goes down to maybe the last barrier where it's avoided. So you could see that if that last barrier...
out of all the protections, all have failed except maybe the last one.
Correct. That would be considered a near miss. So we've seen an increase in those, and everyone obviously is trying to figure out why that is. But there's no question that if you try to squeeze in more and more arrivals and departures into a specific airport, the margins is going to start decreasing. And the same comes if you're trying to fly as many hours as possible for a lot of crews. There's going to be more of a fatigue issue creeping in. So this is something that we need to be vigilant against, and especially the authorities out there, EASA, FAA, and so on.
I think that there's been a lot of near misses, perhaps ignored in America because of congestion.
Yep.
And in fact, maybe the collision at Washington Airport with the military helicopter is what happens when the near misses are not taken seriously, because I think it was a big factor was congestion. The fact that if a pilot flies 100 feet high, if that's going to cause an accident, then that's a single point of failure, and there's many other reasons that would come together. I feel that we should be taking more interest in some of the near misses, particularly in America at the moment. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Now, in the case of the DC, obviously we're waiting for the final report. It's going to take a little while, and there's going to be, again, a lot of different factors. But I mean, we know a couple of things. We know that the aircraft that was involved in the collision had broken off a pre-planned approach into doing a visual approach, and the reason that they did that was to squeeze another departure out ahead of them. So there's absolutely the congestion and the fact that there was a lot of traffic going out of that relatively small airport. And then you had the military helicopter traffic that had caused a lot of near misses before. Like I saw figures of thousands of different near misses that had been reported but not been acted on. I'm sure that that's going to form part of the final report once it comes.
Another critical part of aviation safety is what we call a just culture.
Oh, yes.
And I think that not many people will understand this, because I don't think there's just culture in many industries at all. So can you please explain what just culture is, how hard it is to have it, and how hard we've got to protect it?
Just culture is among the most beautiful things in the aviation industry. And I hope, I mean, I have been working for an airline my entire career where just culture actually is prevalent. And what it is that very, very, it's hard to put your finger on, but it's the feeling that you can self-report without being afraid of losing your job. So if you've made a mistake and that mistake has led to an undesirable outcome and you report it, and it's an honest mistake, it's not you breaking the rules willfully, but something happened and you made a mistake and you report it.
You haven't turned up to work drunk.
Exactly.
It's an honest mistake.
You missed a turn off on a taxiway or something like that. You can report it, and it will. You know that report is going to be handled by a manager that's going to look at what the root cause for this is. And the root cause might well be training. You might end up getting some extra training, but it could also be that the layout of that airport is faulty, or that there's something else. But
or fatigue.
Or fatigue, exactly. But the point is that in a just culture, you're never punished for honest mistakes. The only time...
And you're never criminalized for honest mistakes, because in many industries they're looking for the scapegoat, and they'll say that person has to pay even if it's an honest mistake.
Exactly. So and what happens then is that without just culture, there's two things, right? First of all, obviously the employees, the people working, are going to be very they're going to try to protect themselves. So they're not going to report things that they think could put them in trouble. So this means that probably issues within the company is going to go unnoticed until something really bad happens. So that's number one. From a company perspective, you are really, when you're firing people for mistakes they made, the only thing you're doing is that you're treating the symptoms of the issue. You never get to the root cause. And obviously that just means that more people are going to make the same mistake, and you're going to keep firing people, but you never get to the reason why those people make that mistake. So without a just culture, there can never really be proper quality assurance either.
I mean, it's a really important part of safety. Does it exist in any other industry that you know of?
So I'm sure it does, but I don't think to the same extent. Because as you pointed out earlier on, our industry has learned our lessons through blood, tears, and twisted metal. We know what happens if we don't take care of our quality problems. And we have found that just culture is probably one of the foundational pillars to making sure that we stay as safe as we are. So we celebrate it. We highlight it, we lift it up. It's part of our recurrent training to point out how the safety management system works together with Just Culture. So I don't know that any other industry does it in that way, even though it might be there in the background, it might be incidental rather than very much on the agenda as it is in aviation. And it's interesting actually, because I always say, a good example is, I do quite a few accident or incident investigations, which involves Air France. Okay. And a lot of people then ask, okay, so is there something wrong? Why is something happening to Air France? Why are there so many incidents? And what I always point out is that actually these are incidents. No one was hurt. What you're seeing is a company that reports things. So this is a safe company because we're seeing these
It's when people stop reporting, you're in trouble.
Exactly. When you come across a company that doesn't report anything, then you should be starting to be worried. But if you have a company where everyone just are honest and they report it and there's an investigation and we get to the root cause and we get better, that is actually a sign of a truly healthy safety culture.
All right, now I'm going to take you on to a bit of a sensitive chestnut, perhaps. It's the comparison of competency and proficiency. Some people have different definitions. Let's imagine competency is passing your driver's license. You can now drive a car, and in Australia, you've had 120 hours of driving with an instructor before you can get a driving license. Proficiency is when you've then learned to drive that car, and maybe you're a racing car driver. You're an expert that can deliver excellence on demand. So competency and proficiency. So my question to you is, Petter, can you have proficiency or can you be an expert without experience?
So the answer is you can get somewhere in the way of expertise without that much experience. You obviously need some experience, but that forms part of the training in my view. So I think that you can have an acceptable level of expertise, providing that you have the training, the regulatory training, and the evidence-based training needed in order to get you to that point. And then you can put a relatively inexperienced pilot into a cockpit of a complex aircraft and have them perform to an acceptable level without a high level of experience. And I base that on the fact that I've been training cadets coming straight out of flight training for my 15 years career as an instructor, going straight into a complex 737 operation where they have been performing beautifully. But it has been providing that they come from the correct flight schools that has been audited to keep the training to a certain level, and that they then follow through training in the airline, and that they then have really, really robust procedures to hold on to while they're building their professional experience.
I have the expression that I think a good pilot is a pilot that has been scared. And if you want to train the military to do the hard things, the dangerous things, you have to put them at risk in the training and perhaps have them scared. Do you have an opinion on that?
So I get what you're coming from, but I'm not sure how to actually, change that or apply that into real life, because what we're talking about here, and the reason we have this discussion, I think, is because obviously there's a difference between, for example, Europe and the US, where the US have an hourly minimum experience rule before you can start flying for an airline. It's 1,500 hours in most cases, with some exceptions, before you're allowed to start flying for an airline. And in Europe, you just need to have your commercial pilot license and all your instrument and so on, of course. But basically, once you have your certification, you're allowed to start applying for jobs, and then it's up to the airline to if they want to take you or not with that little experience. So
how many hours do you need to get the European multi-pilot license?
Generally, it's around 200 hours.
And Petter, how many of those 200 to 250 hours are actually in the aircraft, flying an aircraft?
It depends on the type of training that you're going through. I think there's more simulator training if you go through an MPL scheme than if you go through a normal CPL IRME scheme. But I don't know. I don't have the exact figures. But I also don't think that it matters. I know what you're coming from, right? That you if you're in a simulator, you would not you don't fear anything, because you know that no matter how much you screw up, you're still going to just walk out of the simulator. But I still feel, and I have confidence in that the people that are actually evaluating training organizations, they can do so pretty well. And I've seen some absolutely excellent pilots coming out straight after 250 hours. Of course, they don't have the experience on the 737, but that's why I am there, to teach them that. But I've also seen horrific examples of people with a lot of hours which do not have the quality at all. So in my view, it has less to do with hours of experience and more to do with how you absorb training, the type of training you have, and the type of experience that you absorb. Because someone flying around for 1,500 hours in a small aircraft, just to reach the experience level, they might equally also have never really been scared. But they might have picked up a lot of bad habits that they now need to de-learn when they get out to the airlines. But if you have someone who's gone through a very good, controlled training environment aimed at making them proficient for the airlines, and then you get them into the airline immediately, you can teach them the right things to do, the procedures, the way to think, already from the beginning, and have much stronger pilots than if you would do it based on some arbitrary number.
The reason this is topical is because in America they have a limit. The FAA has a limit of 1,500 hours requirement before, and in fact it is reduced if you're military or have different backgrounds, but let's say it's 1,500 hours. They determined, and this came in after a crashing in Colgan, a famous crash, where they determined there are so many different factors, including the airline itself not being a good airline. But even in that case, if the airline's not being good, you need to have pilots that can maybe challenge authority, step up in the cockpit if required. I mean, I guess the question is, with these pilots that have, let's say, 80 hours, which is less hours flying the aircraft than drivers need to drive a car to get their driving license, do you think they're apprentice pilots sitting in the right-hand seat?
So I wouldn't call them apprentices, because they have shown that they have the competence needed to be there. However, there's no question that no matter how many hours you have when you get into the right seat, you are going to be on a very steep learning curve. Like, you are going to be taught how to do, and that's the same for someone who has never flown an airliner but jumps in at 1,500 hours. They're also going to be brand new to the airline world, and they are going to essentially be apprentices. They are going to learn from their training captains and their senior captains for a long time. And in fact, what I saw as a training captain was cadets coming out with very low hours. But obviously with being slightly behind as they are until they're through the line training, and then we release them. But the benefit was that those pilots were very conservative. They knew their limits. They would not take on something if they felt that now that I'd prefer you to fly this approach. I am going to watch how you do it, and then I will do it with a line training captain and get help to kind of get to the proficiency there. What we saw, though, was that as pilots started to increase in experience, when they were up to 1,500, 1,600 hours or so, that's when they really started to think that they had experience, and they started to